Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to the SikhCast, the podcast for the Sikh Research Institute. My name is Santbir Singh, and I'm a research associate here at the SikhRI. I'm also currently doing my PhD in sociology at York University here in Toronto. Today, I will be speaking to Harinder Singh. Harinder Singh is a senior fellow and innovation director at the Sikh Research Institute. Harinder Singh leads the Guru Granth Sahib project, and he also focuses on developing critical thinking for individuals and institutions via the State of the Panth reports. He is a widely respected educator and thinker attempting to live one force oneness paradigm that radiates in all. And I've known Harinder Singh myself for almost 30 years, and he's a person that I often go to for questions or answers when I'm looking for more insight on Sikh-related issues. So this is a perfect opportunity for us here on this podcast. Welcome, Harinder Singh.
Varji Khalsa, Varji Fateh. It's nice to join you. This is the first Santbir. I guess I've known you since you were in high school, but now we are in a different format here and working together as colleagues.
Yes, yeah, this has been quite the journey for us, for sure. So today our topic is going to be on Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, the man, the myth, the truth. Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale was an integral figure in 20th century Sikh history, a really important person who's actually been given the title of the greatest Sikh of the 20th century, a pivotal figure in the 1970s and early 1980s. Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale could be considered the leader of the community from 1982 to 1984 when he led the Yudh Morcha in Amritsar, Punjab. And he was shaheed, or killed or martyred, in June of 1984, protecting the sanctity and sovereignty and dignity of the Harinder Sahib Akal Takht Sahib complex in June of 1984 in the June Ghallughara. So this is a really important figure who there's a lot of sort of questions around, a very celebrated figure by many in the community, but also a figure that some people are a little bit uncomfortable with. And one of the many questions that comes up around him, and this is a question that comes up again and again, something I've read personally many times, something I've looked at even in works by Sikh authors, is this idea that he was somehow a creation of Indira Gandhi and the Congress Party of India, and that he, after being created by them as sort of a figure to appeal to the masses, so that attention would be given away from the Shromani Akali Dal, the main Sikh political party. He sort of, like a Frankenstein's monster, almost got out of control, and they couldn't control him anymore, and that led to June 84. So could you give us some insight into this common criticism, this common myth about Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale?
Sure, Santbir, you and I have talked about this, but let me actually give maybe two-level answer to this one. And over the years, my own understanding of this has evolved. The first time that I recall reading about this was actually in an old article written by, I think his name is Veer Sanghvi. And he mentioned that somehow Jathedar Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale was a creation of Congress. It was facilitated by the President of India, Gyani Zail Singh at that time, on behest of Mrs. Gandhi. That's sort of what was written for the first time. I think, but we got to realize that article came in 1986. And the reason that's important is after the martyrdom or the killing of the Sant, as most people like to call Jathedar Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. So newspaper article wrote that. And within that article, it actually very clearly mentioned that, look, this was a game between Delhi and Punjab and Haryana politics. So this is something we have to understand, that back then, Mrs. Gandhi is trying to figure out what to do with several spaces within India, several states within India. And at the time, Bhajan Lal is the main Congress supporter of Mrs. Gandhi in Haryana. Yes. And in Chandokala, Bhindranwale was doing a lecture one time, and they wanted to arrest him, but nobody arrested him. So somebody is facilitating or not facilitating is a question which gets raised. The idea here essentially is it actually helped Congress to have someone who was giving trouble to the traditional Akalis because Congress was not getting along with the Shromani Akali Dal and its various factions in Punjab. And he was working with the Akalis. He was giving them tough time when they would not stand true to their word or commitment towards betterment of Sikhs in Punjab. So they facilitated it. So that's the first thing, that it was primarily brought up in an article which was written posthumously.
Yes.
Second thing I would mention is, as I started my journeys, I was also curious about this because I also hear this. And really, one time I was in conversations because I meet many people in Delhi and other places as well. And the secretary of Gyani Zail Singh at the time was Sardar Tarlochan Singh. Now, Sardar Tarlochan Singh is a very colorful personality in the sense that he has worked with Congress, he has worked with Akalis, he now works with BJP, he's been a former minority commissioner of India. I asked him this once in Delhi. I said, what's the reality here? This is what he told me. And he eventually penned this down, and you can Google it and read about it.
Yes.
He said, we never denied it. He definitely wasn't for Congress, but it facilitated us as well. We were benefiting from people saying that. And he says, one pictorial evidence which people cite this is there's a samagam in Delhi. Jathedar in Delhi at the time who worked with Mrs. Gandhi, he had died. And it's his Pog ceremony, it's his funeral ceremony. And Gyani Zail Singh and Sant Bhindranwale are sitting close to each other, and somebody takes that picture. And that also prompts this whole myth about that somehow they were close. Look, even when there is a funeral in last 5 years of KPS Gill's father, all political party people went there. There's one thing very clear in Punjabi Sikh culture on marriages and on death, and primarily at the death time. If somebody is prominent and has done things for the Sikhs, regardless of their affiliations and shortcomings, the leadership does show up. So those are the two things we can work with. Bhindranwale never accepted this. Bhindranwale's claim to success was that he was not anyone's except the Guru's. And then everyone wants to make him either of particular Akalis or particular Jathebandis or political party, but it was none of it. He was actually of the Guru, and he was working for the betterment of the Panth and as an extension betterment of Punjab.
Yes, I've read that statement by Tarlochan Singh, and he actually goes into a little bit of detail, and he says that it was inter-Congress politics between Zail Singh and Darbara Singh, who happened to be the chief minister of Punjab at the time, if I remember correctly. And so this inter-Congress politics has now become this long-standing myth that just permeates in the culture, and people keep referencing the same story again and again, and it almost takes on a veneer of truth when there's nothing behind it that holds up to reality.
So let's actually add another angle to it.
Yes.
You're right. So you've read that statement, right? So this was Jathedar Santokh Singh's Pog, which is where the picture got taken.
Yes.
But there is another element to this. Within these conversations, who is taking these conversations between Darbara Singh, between Zail Singh, which is a Congress politics of two Sikhs, on the orders, eventually they're also being the Prime Minister of India at the time, Mrs. Gandhi. Bhajan Lal is the Haryana congressman. And Kuldeep Nayyar is the one who says, I'm getting disclosed of all this. Kuldeep Nayyar, who is a prominent, presented as a prominent newsman of India, who has written books about it, but he does not disclose the full things. He's the one who's saying, I'm hearing these things. And Kuldeep Nayyar is important to mention in this conversation. So you have reporters who are not Sikhs. You have politicians who are Sikhs, who are serving Mrs. Gandhi. And then you have Jathedar Jarnail Singh, who is working with all of them, but is not of anyone.
Yes. And I want to narrow in on that point, actually, which you said so brilliantly, this idea that he was not of anyone, that he was not beholden to any other group. Is this part of why he's so appealing to the Sikh masses, even all these years later? Is it because of the fact that in reality, he was not a stooge of any of these figures.
Not only was he not stooge, I mean, we can't even think of that. He was not even of one particular persuasion or school of thought once he became the leader of the Sikhs. And why that's important, and by the way, this is not just today, even back then. If we look at and hear the testimonies of people on the day, and this includes, by the way, Professor of Punjabi University, Patiala, he's on the record describing this, that professors at the time in Punjab, the day he was getting anointed as the head of Jatha Pindra or Damdami Taksal of Chauk Mehta, because there are different persuasions and they're all outgrowths of Gyani Sampradaya and Gyani traditions of Sikh understandings of Sikh thought, schools of thought. The day he's getting anointed, everyone is curious who this person is who is becoming now the head of Taksal. From that period to becoming the head of what we will say not installed by anyone, not SGPC, not any ceremony, but organically becomes the Jathedar of the Panth. That journey is equally important because once he became the Jathedar of the Panth, the leader representing the Sikhs, including among Agalis, he did not represent Taksal back then. He only represented the Panth. So yes, he is, forget being a stooge, he did not even cave into his own school of thought. And this is a mark of a true leadership in historical Khalsa traditions, that you may come from any background, any dera, any school of thought, any jathebandi, any political persuasion, but once you are of the Panth, you only represent those interests. And this is one of the reasons that even in 2024, regardless of which political party you are from or the political climate you might be in the last 4 decades, Bhindranwale represents more than a man. Because remember in the introduction today, you said we're going to talk about the man. Well, yes, we will talk about the man, but more importantly, it's the phenomena which gets created. That we went back to, and after a very long period, that individualism doesn't matter anymore. The individual identity doesn't matter. The individual upbringing doesn't matter, and goes to this idea that we will go back to the ideals of Sikhi. We will go towards the ideals of the Panth, and he represents that equally with Hindus, equally with Sikhs, equally with all political parties. And this is a rare, rare thing in last 100 years for sure. But, and I say this, that equally with Hindus, because this thing about that he created a rift between Hindus and Sikhs is completely unfounded, based on his speeches, based on the testimonies of non-Sikh writers, including A.R. Darshi. So this is very, very important, that he was a product of Punjab who was grounded in Sikhi.
Yes, very much so. So let's actually narrow in on that even while he was alive, he has a famous statement that even if a bird falls dead somewhere in Punjab, Bhindranwale gets blamed for it. That regardless of any crime that was happening in Punjab, the Congress government, the central government of Indira Gandhi would blame Bhindranwale for any violence that happened in Punjab. But there was a lot of violence in the lead up to June of 84. So who was behind this violence, and why was Jathedar or Sant Bhindranwale being blamed for what was happening in the lead up to June 84?
So this is a great question, and I think we have to put a lot of context around this. And if we want to understand this, he actually, Jathedar Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, he himself has at least 3 speeches that I can recall where he directly answers this. In one of them, he actually says that this is being based on 3 individual news reporters, Hindu news reporters of Punjab. So this is very important. In fact, he goes on to say that he in fact addresses Mrs. Gandhi directly in one of the speeches, where he says, you claim you have a CID running around, which means, gathering intelligence on me. And you have CBI who can run investigations as to whether I am causing this violence or I am creating these hit lists. So why don't you produce those lists, do your investigations, And if I am found guilty of doing any of these crimes, and he says in the Hazuri of the Guru, this is why he comes from a Sikh perspective, the Khalsa tradition, that in the presence of the Guru, I'm saying this, I will cut myself into pieces. So what this basically is saying in the Sikh parlance and the Punjabi parlance is, these news were manufactured by Hindu editor. He names three of them. I don't fully remember all of them, but I remember one of them was Ramesh. And he directly addresses it. So absolutely there was a violence, but this was being blamed on primarily on Bhindranwale without any evidence. That's first. Second thing I want to mention, that there was a manufactured campaign to show that somehow the violence was a lot in Punjab. Now, this is very important to understand. If you look at the period between 1982 and 84, which is where a lot of these claims were coming out during those 2 years, there is a comparison. I remember reading that comparison that in UP and Delhi, there were more than 5,000 murders, whereas in Punjab in those years, one year was 500 something, another year was 600 something.
Oh, wow.
So, like, what are we talking about here? You have much more violence and many more murders, which are taking place in the capital city itself, as well as the most populous state in India, UP, whereas you keep presenting through the national media, and everyone has to remember, there was only one Doordarshan, which is primarily where I grew up watching all of this. And then there were some newspapers which printed this. And this, by the way, analysis was done by Hindu newspaper writers based out of Delhi as well, that this is a propaganda which is manufactured and is being thrown nationwide, that somehow Punjab is much more violent. So those two things are equally important. Who was creating this propaganda and how Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale reacted to it? And then secondly, contextualizing that it was not even 1/10 of the killings and murders in UP and Delhi.
Oh, wow. And a lot of people don't realize this today, but Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale was actually arrested in 1982, harkening back to that Ghallughara incident that you mentioned. And when he was in jail, when he was arrested, the trial did not go forward because there was a lack of evidence, from what I remember reading, that there was, in fact, no evidence to hold him and start a trial because he was completely innocent of the claims that the government was making. Is that correct?
Absolutely, it's correct. I, in fact, have personally talked with the police officer who was sent there to arrest him.
Oh, wow.
Even his testimony, who eventually was sidelined within Punjab Police, he did retire as a DGP. Jarnail Singh Chahal is his name, but he was retired as a DGP of Railways, I think. So the point being, because Bhindranwale had said at the time that if you want to come arrest me, come do it. I'm right here, but make sure you send somebody who is Amritdhari Sikh. I'm contextualizing that on purpose for two reasons. That firstly, only once he was arrested. He was not arrested in Bombay. He was not arrested in Delhi. He was not arrested in Haryana. He was arrested in Punjab once. And his only demand was that make sure you send the right person to do it. And the government did do at the time. And they did release him for the lack of evidence. So this thing about, and this is also going to be very, very important when we discuss that 82 to 84 and primarily June 84. So this thing about the white paper of Government of India saying they went there to arrest or eliminate 100 or so men, well, the arrest warrants were never issued. The DC of Amritsar is on record saying it, including the Lieutenant General Sinha is on record saying this, that look, this is a political problem. It needs to be solved politically. You don't have any arrest warrants, yet you are doing quote-unquote operation to eliminate these Sikhs. So this is important. If they really want to get arrested, where is the arrest warrant even in June? And there is no resistance because he had offered himself for arrest even earlier.
Yes, yeah. That in June of 84, he was not a wanted man, that there was no arrest warrant or no FIR issued against him. Let's go back now to 1982 when the Dharam Yudh Morcha started. Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale starts this Morcha on his own to protest various issues. And the Akali Dal joins the Morcha, and the Morcha becomes about the Anandpur Sahib resolution, these list of demands that had been long-standing since Punjabi Suba had been achieved in 1966. certain issues like river water, Chandigarh, and so on and so forth, and other socioeconomic demands as well. And the let's first talk about, because the Anand Prasad resolution is so important to understanding Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. What type of document was this? Was this a radical document? Was this a separatist document? Was this something that was advocating for the breakup of the Indian government? What exactly was it that made this so controversial?
What made it controversial was it was for the protection of India, not just the protection of Sikh rights and Punjab's rights.
Oh,
And when somebody is not interested in protecting India, and I say this intentionally, because again, Bhindranwale was on record saying, we have died for this country. We are not interested in getting separated from this country. I do not ask for Khalistan, but I also don't oppose it. It is for the rulers of India, Mrs. Gandhi, to figure out what she wants to do with, whether she wants to keep us as equal citizens, but we will not remain there as slaves. That's why this document was adopted, not just by him, but the whole political party of Sikh representation at the time, Shromani Akali Dal. It was presented and written and drafted initially by Sardar Kapoor Singh, who is considered the one who understands not just the civil service of India, but he was also the parliamentarian because he spoke in the upper house of the Indian Parliament, Rajya Sabha. And Dharam Yudh Morcha adopted that as a larger demand. That and that in that demand, everyone came together. And as you know, Santbir, Dharam Yudh Morcha, initially Jathedar Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale actually had his own morcha.
yes.
And that morcha was for the release of prisoners again. Because we have forgotten that in 78 there was something else going on when the Vaisakhi of 1978, the whole Nakali Nirankari, or the Nirankaris installed by Mrs. Gandhi, had clashed with Sikhs, and 13 Sikhs were killed peacefully in Amritsar. So in this context, a lot going on. But coming back to Dharam Yudh Morcha, he actually worked with the head of the existing Morcha at the time, who was Sant Longowal, Harchand Singh Longowal. So which shows that he actually agreed to work with Akalis where he opposed the Akalis in their politics in several areas, because this was for the betterment of the larger agenda of the Sikhs and Punjab. And this document, Anandpur Sahib resolution, was actually about protecting India. It was actually about progressing India, taking them out of the central approaches, which was more Russian-based model, to a more federal approach, which is more like an American model.
Yes, where the states had more rights over things like language, culture, education, and so forth.
It was a progressive document. I, in fact, will add that only in the last 5 years, the left and little bit of the center left is now accepting this is what India needs, a federal structure, which
Yes,
means Sikhs, including Sardar Kapoor Singh, Shromani Akali Dal, Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, the solution they envisioned and worked towards, and some of them died for, is the solution now the Indian progressives are seeking.
that's incredible. Now, the Dharam Yudh Morcha begins in 82 with this Ardas at Akal Takht, where all these Panthik leaders, including the head of the Shromani Akali Dal, Sant Harchand Singh Longowal, and Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, make a promise in front of Guru Granth Sahib, in front of Akal Takht Sahib, that they will not back down on this morcha, on this peaceful, non-violent struggle, until the Anand Prasad resolution is implemented. But by 1983, late 1983, there's a lot of conflict within the leadership of the Morcha between Harchand Singh Longowal and Sant Jarnail Singh. What was that conflict? Why was there conflict within the Morcha? Why did the Shromani Akali Dal start to distance itself from Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, who they were very close with in 1982? And what led to that break in relations between the two organizations, or the two people?
Yeah, so I think organizations and people is complex here. I don't think we have a good understanding. I have gone through, in my own journey of figuring that out, multiple conversations with people who were present there, and multiple readings of both the mainstream English readings as well as in Punjabi magazines as to what was happening at that time. I think we can have a couple of good theories on it. I don't think we have a complete grasp of it. But simply put, there became this sort of a rise of this idea that Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale took Ardas very seriously, because not that others weren't sant and weren't as serious, but they were not equally serious as Baba Jarnail Singh. For him, the Khalsa lifestyle is very important. When we do Ardas, it is very important. Why, I'm going to connect this to his early rise, because you're talking about 82. Let's go back to 77 when nobody knew him.
Yeah.
When nobody knew him, the very people who wrote against him using very negative language from New Delhi, like Khushwant Singh, like Tavleen Singh, you know what they were writing earlier? That this man only has a 6-phrase agenda. Nashe chadao, amrit chako, sing sajo. Which means what? Get rid of intoxications, become an initiated Sikh by taking Khande ki Paul. And then if you think about this is about Khalsa lifestyle.
Yep.
This is why he became popular. When he's invoking that in the policy programs, including of Shromani Akali Dal, that look, we take Ardas very seriously. We take these rights very seriously. We cannot be compromising, because we haven't seen any of the accommodations which have been done since 1947 actually taking any serious form of implementation. So this is where the Akalis who wanted to negotiate with Mrs. Gandhi and her agents on promises only, but not seeing it in policies, they started to also present him as being that Sant is implying Sant Bhindranwale is being unreasonable in that sense. But really, this is where we have to understand the Sikh narrative more. He was not being unreasonable. He was not the forerunner of this Morcha when it started. He joined the Morcha.
Yes.
He became the proponent and the number one advocate of the Morcha, whereas others wanted to be part of the electoral politics of Punjab and Sikhs. And eventually, many of those who were involved in that protest and Ardas, they actually came out within that week, first week of June or late May, with their hands up, which means they didn't die to protect the sanctity of the Ardas and their commitment to the Ardas, that we would want all these recommendations implemented, proposals implemented. So I would say it's an issue of commitment. He became non-compromising in commitment. And because of that, the secularists, the Akalis who wanted to be negotiating for other gains in the politics of Punjab, they started presenting him in a little bit different light, which is not in line with the Sikh tradition.
So these compromises, these discussions that were going on during the time of the Morcha, these are related to, and I think this is important, the context for our listeners and our viewers to understand, to long-standing demands of the Sikhs that actually reached back to before 1947, back to the 1930s and 20s even, where the Sikhs had been made certain promises by Congress leadership which had never been implemented. Could you quickly give us some context on that? Like, what were the issues that led to the Dharmiyat Morcha beyond the Anandpur Sahib resolution?
So it is not the beyond Anandpur Sahib resolution. Anandpur Sahib resolution became that this is what we want, we are working towards. So it was a very articulated document with a large preamble, which is all about Sikhs, and then the demands are all about Punjab, Sikhs, and India. And that became the document to work with, because it was adopted in late 70s by the Shromani Akali Dal. But what led up to it? So Santbir, I would say, it has to do with recognition of Sikhs as independent people. A lot of those issues still remain. Technically, one may argue constitutionally in India that they are presented as a subset of Hindus, just like Jains and Buddhists. Technicalities aside, we know this is the case when there is no Sikh law, for example, for marriages or property rights and things of that nature. So if there is no personal code of the Sikhs, you will never have that independence, which other communities in India, the minorities, do. And that's why our marriages were even lumped under Hindu Marriage Act, which Anand Marriage Act was repealed, which existed before the independence of India. Now, this is important that ceremonially now we have marriage certificates, but there is no Sikh law, so that certificate means nothing. This is how the games are getting played even in the last 20 years as well. It has to do with the river water disputes. Punjab owns the waters, so this was very much about Punjab. This also had to do with acceptance of the Constitution of India, whereas the promises were that India will not accept any constitution which is not acceptable to Sikhs, and the two Sikh representatives never accepted it. So the four people from Punjab were recruited whose names had Singhs in them, but they were not Akali representatives, which means they were not Sikh representatives. So this goes on, and then in 60s and 70s, it has to do with Punjabi Suba movement, which has to do with that every state in India was organized on the basis of language except Punjab. It didn't even get statehood, and it had to do its own civil disobedience for 16 years before it was truncated and organized and accepted by various formulas it went through. Then it has to do with the Defense Act, which was passed in India, where it says we need to reduce the percentage population in the defense forces of India equivalent to the percentage population in the country. Obviously, it's targeted Sikhs. This is what we call in America the Jim Crow laws. It didn't say this is targeting Sikhs, because at the time of the British, at the time of when India and Pakistan got independences, Sikhs were up to 30%, whereas their number in population was less than 2%. And now, why this is important, you have to understand. Well, because there were two traditional things Sikhs did: farming and soldiers. So when they say in India, Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, what they really didn't realize that Sikhs and Punjab are not just punching above their weight even today. Back then, they were representing India in the 1/3 to 2/3 in both capacities. So think about that for a second. So anytime somebody says that Sikhs don't mean well for India, Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale didn't mean well for India, that's just not the case. The facts are very, very clear. His own statements are very clear. In fact, I will invoke Khushwant Singh here. Khushwant Singh has an article which he wrote, again, pre-84 articles.
Okay.
He actually uses the term Arya Samajis and Mahasabha, which is exactly the term which Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale used in his speeches when he's referring to the hatred Arya Samajis and Mahasabha is developing against the Sikhs. And when Khushwant Singh is writing this in his books, there's that 2-volume history of the Sikhs, he actually writes this. He says, and he invokes the word Khalistan. He's like, Sikhs are being driven to such an extent that there seems to be no solution, I'm paraphrasing that, other than creation of Khalistan, so they can exercise their religious rights, so can exercise their economic freedoms and other things as well. So, this idea about Sikhs not getting what they were promised pre-independence, pre-1947, which from a Sikh and Punjab angle, is actually the 1947 is more of a partition than independence.
Yes.
Whatever was promised by the ruling elite of India from 47 to 82, you see that there are movements after movement to get those recognized. And every time, this is sort of, I'm oversimplifying, but if I may, this is sort of like, because Gaza is on our mind these days, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things, a video of the current Prime Minister of Israel is on the record saying this: we're gonna not give them anything until we have pushed them 98% of the way out. And then we will give them 2%.
Yeah.
This is what has happened with Sikhs from 1947 to 82. And in 82, there is a Morcha going on. In 84, there is a battle going on, and there's a Ghallughara being invoked, which means there are people who are going to fight this now with arms. There are people who are going to resist this, and then the state is going to target every Sikh with a particular operations, quote unquote, in Punjab, and particular operations, quote unquote, outside Punjab within India. That's the larger understanding. And Bhindranwale represented somebody who understood this. So, in the introduction, sorry, it's a little bit a longer answer, but in the introduction today, you said greatest Sikh of 20th century has been called.
Yes.
Who gave him that title? It was not just the resistance or the Kharkus or the separatists or the militants who fight on behalf of Punjab. It included Harinder Singh Mahbub. I was there. I was part of these conversations, observing who was involved in these conversations. It includes Harinder Singh Mehboob, the person who India gave the highest literary award for his book. It included Sardar Gurtej Singh, who was Indian IPS and IAS, who resigned in November of 83 once he discovered something in June was about to happen with the Sikhs. It included professors from Punjab University, Patiala. So my point in saying this is that what Bhindranwale represented is when the word Khalistan is invoked even today, it is presented as a separatist, which is where your question started with Anandpur Sahib resolution. It is presented as a separatist cause. No, it wasn't. It became that after 84. It was primarily about the rights of Sikhs, the rights of Punjab, and what the India's next step needs to be to protect every Indian.
Yes. So let's now turn back to the time of the Morcha. One of these iconic images that you often see in the lead up to Chirasi, in the lead up to the Ghallughara of June 84, are images of young Sikh men holding guns around the Harinder Sahib complex. And for a lot of people, this is a very jarring image because they think of religious sites as being this place where violence should not happen. And you have all these figures, all these young men under the leadership of Sant Jarnail Singh who are heavily armed. How can we put that into a Sikh context? What can we learn from that? And what does that represent? And is that a valid critique of Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale?
Yeah, I think we should understand that question more when people ask, and then we need to give them two answers. And I can understand that concern people having. So let's answer this from a common sense angle first. The common sense angle is, in India, to get a licensed gun, the senior superintendent of police has to sign off on it, which means it's heavily regulated. In Punjab, even today or back then, there were less guns than UP and MP and Bihar,
Wow.
which are the three other states where most of the violence takes place. So this thing about always showing him with his men with guns, it is done purposefully by particular media within India and outside. So it is in the people's mind, it becomes about that he is somehow a militant and a violent man.
Yeah.
Now, even within the global context, let's present a couple of things here. Firstly, people should know, including those Sikhs who have tough time with this, that we very much display our weaponry at Anandpur Sahib and Akal Takht Sahib, and we very much in our museums, whether we are at V&A in London or a new one about to come up in Dharam in Canada, we are always displaying this. You go to the Wallace collection in UK, there's a display of that from the Guru's period, from the missiles period. And what does Bhindranwale represent? He represents that tradition. Weaponry is misunderstood. It is purposefully being misunderstood, I would say, in the case of Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. Sikhs have always celebrated this of the Gurus, of the great Sikhs. Bhindranwale is in the line of the Khalsa tradition. And he is always, that's why, with the arrow. In fact, in Punjabi, they called him Teer Wala Baba. Huh?
Yes.
Because the Teer represents the continuity from the Guru Gobind Singh period, the man of the old. But he's very much the man of the current. So you see, because Guru Gobind Singh had guns, Maharaja Ranjit Singh had guns, all the missile sardars had guns, all the goons are having guns. Why can't a Sikh of the Guru, who is actually told to carry a kirpan, also have the modern weapons with him? That's something which we really have to get comfortable with and understand what's going on. Anyone who is fighting the state has carried weapon. Whether you like that or not, even Nelson Mandela on his shoulder carried AK-47 as a leader of ANC, which was African National Congress, which, by the way, was a communist organization. And he said, I will not put this weapon down until there is one man, one vote. But now we have sanitized that image of Nelson Mandela.
Yes.
And we have to realize that there's a sanitization which the world is going through. And the political manipulation, the media manipulation plays with that sanitization in the case of Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale as well. Now, second thing, the Sikh tradition, which is what you're after, but I think the first part was equally important. Sikh tradition is very clear on it. Our model is Sant Sipahi, Miri Piri. In fact, this is, if you notice, even in this conversation, I'm going back and forth between Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale as a Jathedar and Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale as a Sant. I really think the title is, the Jarnail word is already there in his first name. Let's understand that's a modified form of the English word general. In fact, when the Punjabis wrote about it, not even Sikhs, a Punjabi Muslim who is in June in Delhi as a correspondent from Pakistan, Mr. Randhawa, when he writes about that, within 2 weeks of that, he writes a poem and he says, who was Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale? He says he was Jarnaila da Jarnail, implying that the decorated journals of the Indian Army who came to serve under him. So that's his first name. So understand what's in the name also. The name is that he's a general. Okay. Second is Sant part, I think, because at the time in 1980s, everyone was a Sant. Just like since 1980s, everyone in a sense, the leaders were called Sant, like Sant Harchand Singh Longowal, for example. Now there are Sants a dime a dozen. I mean, there are so many gurus, Satgurus, Sants, Mahatmas, Brahmagyanis floating around, and it's crazy, which makes us the person just a spiritualist. Sikh tradition is not that. The Khalsa tradition is definitely not that. So the Khalsa tradition is that he became the Jathedar. Jathedar is the leader of the Jatha, leader of the group. He is the group that represents in the tradition of Baba Deep Singh and Vaimani Singhs of the world, who were trained equally in the scriptures, in Guru Granth Sahib, in the Bani, in the Shabad, but also equally in carrying the Khanda and fighting any regime which enters the Darbar Sahib complex. So Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale needs to be seen as a Jathedar who represents the saint and the soldier, Sant and the Sipahi, Mir and the Pir equally. And he was able to demonstrate that in the realities and the propaganda war of 1980s, Punjabis and Sikhs and non-Sikhs and Dalits and Hindus of Punjab actually who witnessed him saw that and they present him properly. Everyone else is playing with a sanitized version of what the world likes to see today.
Yes. We are having this conversation because it's the 40th anniversary of June 84, the really important anniversary for the Sikh community around the world. And to say it just plainly and clearly, oftentimes Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale gets blamed for the Chirasi attack, for the Ghallughara that happened, that it was because he had weapons there, that he was holed up in the complex, that he fortified the complex, and that the government had no option but to go in and to flush him out, to use the government's language. What would be your response to that common critique?
The best critique is to cite the general who did the planning of the attack. When he was asked, did Bhindranwale do a wrong thing by staying there and fighting? And his response is very informative. This is what 18th century tradition is when we cite, what are the chronicles or the people who are fighting on behalf of Ahmad Shah Abdali or Durrani are saying. You know what S.K. Sinha said? He's like, if somebody comes to attack my house and I don't stay there to fight, that's a statement on me. In this case, this was not Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale's personal house. This is the house of the Sikhs. What he did was absolutely right.
Hey.
This is from a general who did the planning. This is from a general who said, I call the PMO, which is Prime Minister's office, that please do not implement this. I will not implement this. So they brought in a different general to implement this, and they made sure they brought in a couple of Sikh generals to implement it in the field. The same general who did the planning, he says, I actually called the PMO's office, that this is a political problem. Let me help you with the political solution. And he's on court saying, well, you have informed us, so we'll take care of the rest, which means he said they didn't want a political solution. They wanted to show to the world Mrs. Gandhi was on a particular track. This is not about Bhindranwale's wrong. This is about the wrong done by the political rulers in Delhi. Another general, Mr. Reddy, is on the record saying this was a manipulation by the rulers in Delhi. So what we have to understand is that when that Indian Defense Review did an analysis of what happened here, I think General Karim did that. When we look at other generals at the time who did the planning or were in commands of particular zones, if we take all the stuff out, just stick to the military element, it is so informative that they appreciated what Bhindranwale did. They defended his right to do that on behalf of the Sikh nation, not just his personal capacity. And now we bring in the Sikh elements of Ardas and then staying there in the tradition of since Guru Gobind Singh, post Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj period and defense of the complex. He did absolutely nothing wrong. But I'm okay with this question. I think we should be okay with this question. We need to tell the facts about what happened. We also need to inform people about what is the Sikh politics and the Sikh way in the Khalsa traditions.
Yes, giving that Sikh perspective instead of answering things from an outside perspective. I think that's one of the most compelling things I've seen in this 40th anniversary so far, is that young Sikhs are wanting to understand this from a Sikh angle and not wanting to understand this issue from other angles, which I think in the past we often saw the explanations coming from outside the community. We now want to understand it from within the community's angles and the Sikh angle. Now let's move on from 84 a little bit. Let's go to the Kisan Morchas of 2 years ago, 3 years ago, where all over Delhi we saw images of Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale being utilized, being used, people marching with his image. You can go into almost any Gurdwara around the world and you'll see his image. You go into many Sikhs' houses and you'll see his image. What does he represent as an icon for Sikhs in the current era? What does he represent for the Sikh community in the current era?
So I have an issue with the word icon. Let me mention my bias here, because I'm also one of the ones, it's like, when we wear Che Guevara t-shirts in the world, we are wearing Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale t-shirts, but we understand very little about what he became as a leader.
Yes.
And this is where I think we need to go more and more towards. And I'm saying this, that I've had conversations and speak where I've been asked to speak about him, and I've done it in a very selective way, a reserved way. But I remember, I think about 10 years ago, I was asked to speak in New York City when Shomani Akali Dal, Amritsar, and other Khadku Jathebandis and other Sikhs had organized a combined function in New York City. And I think that was the first time I publicly spoke about him. And I said, afterwards, how many people told me, those who represent, quote unquote, his cause, that we didn't know so many things about him. So this is the issue, that we must not reduce anyone to be a just icon. We mustn't, and I think Punjabi Sikh psyche is starting to get into this in a popular sense. As you said, even youngsters are wanting to understand the Sikh narrative. But what I do want to say is, people in Punjab, a section of Punjab went through this even 20 years ago, where very openly, even in magazines like Sikh Shahadat, they talked about, was it a Ghallughara or not? Both perspective. Should Bhindranwale should have stayed there or not? Things like what we are discussing today. So we have had that churning in an open intellectual forum without getting upset about these questions. And Sikhs were debating this, Sikhs who were professors or reporters. So I think when we say in last 3 years, we are seeing this more, no, it's not just in last 3 years. This has always been there in Punjab. Now in last 3 years or last 10 years, the media is getting okay with also talking about it. That's the difference.
Yeah.
The Bhindranwale's presence, Bhindranwale as a phenomena, as I like to say, Barbar, repeatedly. We have to understand that phenomena. And what was in that phenomena? When we were talking about Dharam Yudh Morcha, if you look at before the Ardas is done, what has happened in 3 months before that, it was all about protests. It was all about farmers. So the farmers is intrinsically built into our protests. Whether you see it explicitly in last 3 years in Farmer Protest 1.0 or Farmers Protest 2.0, whether you see it explicitly in the Bedbi incidents and the two commissions which have sat in Punjab under various governments, as to Bhindranwale is invoked everywhere. To the level where his contribution, his defense of the Darbar Sahib complex is memorialized very much in the complex itself in last 10 years. And now people who fought with him, they are memorialized not as a small thing. For example, the not 3 portraits, but multiple portraits are in that gallery of SGPC run gallery. Now you may say this is because of the political climate and Akali politics. Yes, but let me also mention, the Khalsa College, the library of Khalsa College is dedicated to the AISSF leader, who was the 2 men you see most of the time is General Shubeg Singh and Pai Amrik Singh next to Jathedar Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. That library of Khalsa College is dedicated to All India Sikh Student Federation President Pai Amrik Singh in Amritsar. And not in last 5 years, much before that. My point in mentioning all this is any movement which is in Punjab, whether it has to do with Guru Granth Sahib, whether it has to do with Akal Takht representation, Sarbat Khalsa, farmers' rights, oppositions to, this Tanashahi, as they are saying in India, which is dictatorial or authoritarian regimes, you will see Bhindranwale being invoked everywhere, because he is one man who accommodated all this, not just for Sikhs in Punjab, but also for Hindus in India. And this is something we really, really need to understand, because he is not the man who hated India, who hated Hindus. The evidence is contrary.
Yeah, that's one of the wonderful things about him, is that if you want to do the research, you can listen to every single speech he made. They're all recorded. They're all on YouTube. You can read the translations of the speeches he made, and you can see very clearly. In fact, SikhRI has been putting out a series this year where we're taking excerpts from his speeches to give you a taste of what the man actually was saying himself, what he was about, and what his policies and his ideas were. And I think it really works to give a nice dose of truth to all of the propaganda that we see. I want to thank Harinder Singh so much for this conversation, such an enlightening conversation, such an interesting conversation. Would you like to add anything else about Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, thank you for this conversation. I think any conversation without discussing, his commitment would be incomplete. His commitment to the Shabad, to Guru Granth Sahib, his commitment to the Panth, the Guru Khalsa Panth. So when we are invoking Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, sure, you can wear his t-shirt, show him with tir or with pistols. But the number one thing to keep in mind is there's a pothi in his hand and there's a simran in his mind.
Yeah.
That's what his training was, like any other training from 18th century Sikhs. The first training is of internal development, which is all through Shabad, which is all through Bani, which is all through Naam. He came on the scene with that preparation. And with that, some people just stop there, which is great if people do stop there. But many who go beyond this element of Sikhs, he also had that. His ability to see through people. I remember asking Joyce Pettigrew, can you name me a person who you think was the most effective? And she named someone else. I said, oh, I was expecting you will say Bhindranwale. And she said, Harinder, you said a man. He wasn't a man. He could see through you. That doesn't happen with just weapons training. That happens with Naam and Shabad training.
Yes.
This is so important in Sikh culture, that whether the current adversary of BJP government, who himself is a RSS member, Subramaniam Swamy is his name, when he directly talked with Baba Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale or Jathedar Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale or Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, since that day in 83 to this year, he continuously defends Baba Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale because he had direct conversations with him. And this is something we need to understand, that there is a world which witnessed what Bhindranwale was, what he represented. What he became was rooted in the Sikh traditions of Naam and Shabad, and went to the ultimate from Shabad to Shahadat Safar. And that's the part which we must acknowledge, that June first week is the Shahadat, which culminated through his journey of Naam and Shabad. So I think this element of Jathedar, Bhindranwale, and people who fought with him, when we say his men, is a little bit misleading. We should say, and his associates, because Sikhs don't have this idea of sycophants.
Yes.
If we are having that, there's a problem with that. Those are all people who did not start out with him, by the way. In fact, many of them were his adversaries. They chose to work with him because what he had become, what he represented, it was beyond denominations, beyond Jathebandis, and they saw in him that the Naam and Shabad was part of it. And lastly, if you do see some quotations which seem aggressive, do read their context. He was a man after all.
Yeah.
When you are dealing with certain things, of course, he's not perfection. And I'm going to end with that. Perfection is only Guru. He could have given certain responses in a much better way. But when you are in the field, when you have a constant propaganda in newspapers against you, Akali is against you, political parties against you. In fact, he's known to say that we can't even tell which CID is informing which Sant of who. And this is so true. I just recall that I was speaking in Philadelphia a few years ago, and I finished talking about June 84. I was leaving after having langar, and this man tapped on my shoulder. I looked back. He says, "Ki main tode naal gal kar sakda? Basically, can I talk to you for a few minutes?" I said, "Sure." And we went in a room. He said, "I am one of the guys whose job was to act like that I'm a sympathizer, but to report on behalf of one of the paramilitary intelligence agencies against him." He says, "Whatever we reported, we don't know how those were presented, but whatever the government said about him was not accurate. I saw what he was. He was not what the government presented him to be." So we have those very people alive who needs to be recorded, and I've encouraged him to give that testimony publicly as well. And this is not somebody who was an Amritari Sikh who was his fan. This is somebody whose job it was to report on who comes to see him, what they discuss. So this is very, very important, Santbir, that this is, I mean, you and I may not get to see many things, but we get to read and investigate many things.
Oh, yeah.
Just like everything else in the world. And people who witness things, people who record things, we have to also have those contexts, which is another thing I try to say. What Tavleen Singhs and Khushwant Singhs have written pre-84 to post-84, there's a dramatic shift because narrative on Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale shifted after June 84.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, he became a terrorist. Well, he was not a terrorist in India before, because this is a manufactured narrative. If he was a terrorist, why would Captain Harinder Singh will try to do meetings with Bhindranwale and Rajiv Gandhi?
Yes.
This is on the record. We have to understand Bhindranwale had everyone's respect. He was a man of his words. If he had shortcomings, they're very real shortcomings, but they probably are one or two. Let's not overshadow those with the 98 other good things he did and what he represented. So essentially, what we really need to understand about Jathedar Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale is that he is steeped in the Sikh tradition of Naam and Shabad, and is equally steeped in the Khalsa tradition of Shahadat.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that perspective. I want to remind our viewers and listeners that throughout this year, we are creating a lot of content on June of 1984 and November 1984, which is the 40th anniversary of. We have articles, podcasts, courses, learning documents, all being created. And all of this can be found at our homepage at sikhri.org. Uh, Harinder Singh has actually written quite wonderfully about 84 before. A lot of the facts, a lot of that perspective of the generals and so on who talked about what happened in 84 can be found in that article. Can you share the title of that article again?
I think it was called 1984 Lies, Lists, and Light.
Yes, Lies, Lists, and Lights. So you can find that on our homepage as well. It's a thorough documentation of about the Ghallughara of June 1984. So thank you again, Harinder Singh, for this wonderful conversation. Really appreciate it. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.